Graniola. This is the Graniola channel, and I'd like to tell you a folk tale. This story, called Winging It, is told by people who see a basic communality between animals and human beings. Because his twin brothers had recently had a birthday, they were now old enough to hunt with their father, and so the boy was left by himself on the banks of a river to fish alone. Without their company, he was finding it difficult to concentrate on the task at hand. He was paying more attention to the sky above him than he was to the river in front of him. And so it was that he focused on a beautiful butterfly that was circling in figure eights above his head. He pulled his empty fishing net out of the river and placed it down on the riverbank beside him. As he did so, he stood up, raised his hands into the air, and started dancing along, following the path of the butterfly. He moved away from his net and was happily swaying and humming to himself without paying any attention to where he was going. By the time he realized this, he also understood that he was actually lost. There was virtually no light penetrating through the thick foliage, and he really couldn't tell from which direction he had come. Frightened, he called out the names of his brothers, but of course there was no answer. When he stopped yelling, he heard a faint sound of rhythmic tapping. He was relieved, thinking there was someone working nearby. He ran toward the sound, but as he got nearer, he saw a woodpecker. "Oh no," he lamented in a disappointed voice. "I thought you were a human being and could help me find my way back home." The woodpecker stopped hammering her beak into the tree as she turned around and looked at him. "You people are so arrogant. I could easily show you the way home. I do live here after all. Why would a human being be better able to help you in the forest than those of us who live here?" "Yeah, you're totally right. I see exactly what you mean. Could you please show me my way home?" "I certainly will not. Like I said, I would be able to do so, but can't you see that I'm busy at work? Again, you human beings are so egocentric that you think that you're the only ones whose needs are important." The woodpecker turned and flew off with the idea of finding a different tree in which to sculpt a nest. The boy was feeling sad and sorry for himself by now. One tear trickled down his face, but only one, because as he felt it, he realized that he would have to be more resourceful. Lifting his head, he saw what looked like an old woman in a rocking chair weaving in front of him. He happily yelled out, "Grandmother, grandmother, can you help me find my home?" Startled by the sound, what he thought was an old woman rose up into a tree branch, and he realized he was actually speaking to a huge native bird. "Don't call me grandmother. I am certainly no relation of yours, and your family has killed and eaten many of my offspring. I have no intention of helping you in any way." This was the first time that it had ever occurred to the boy that the animals might resent him just because he was a human being. He didn't have long to ruminate on this, because suddenly a big piece of fruit fell onto the path in front of him. He was quite hungry, and the act of picking it up and eating it diverted his attention. He quickly realized that the fruit had fallen because a group of monkeys were swinging on the vines that hung from the tree tops. As he watched, those monkeys started descending down to earth, and when their feet touched ground, he could see that most of them stood like human beings, and many of them had costumes and masks just like the people of his tribe. "Ah, hello. Why don't you come along with us? We're going to the Monkey King's birthday party." The boy was happy that here were some animals that seemed to like him. And in his experience, birthday parties usually had good food to eat and lots of fun and games. This one was no different, and it lasted late into the night. As they began to feel exhausted, some people slept in hammocks and others fell asleep on the ground. The boy wasn't quite comfortable on the ground and didn't fall asleep very soundly, and so he heard the Monkey King muttering, "I'm gonna eat that boy, I'm gonna eat that boy, I'm gonna eat that boy." Not surprisingly, this startled the small boy, and he jumped up, and because he was so close to the Monkey King, knocked into him on his hammock. The Monkey King was startled out of his dreaming state. He looked at the boy confused and asked what had happened. Without thinking, the boy answered, "You've been saying that you're going to eat me." That's quite bizarre. It must be just a bad dream that I'm having. Clearly, you know that monkeys don't eat people. Please, let's both go back to sleep. We really deserve a good rest right now. Even before the boy had reached the ground, the Monkey King was sound asleep again. His voice seemed to have changed, but his words had not. "I'm gonna eat that boy, I'm gonna eat that boy, I'm gonna eat that boy." Surprisingly, with a change of voice came a change of body, and there was no longer a monkey in the hammock. There was now a big spotted jaguar. The boy reacted without thinking. He jumped up and started running away from the resting partygoers. When he had covered a safe distance, he sat down heavily on a log. "I hate this place. Nothing about it makes sense to me." As he said this, he felt a small flutter of air against his left cheek and saw the same beautiful blue butterfly that had delighted him such a short time ago. In a sweet tone, it sounded as if she said, "What do you mean by that?" The boy answered, "I feel frightened here. Everything seems to be constantly changing into something else." She laughed. "Yes, you're certainly right about that. This is a much larger and more complex world than the tiny human one that you come from. I understand that in your world things are usually as they seem, and when they change very slowly." The boy hung his head sadly and said to her, "How can I get back to where I belong?" That's quite simple. If that's what you really want, I can turn you into a butterfly and you can follow me back. He had a dizzying feeling of getting smaller and smaller and floating up into the air. And when she said, "Follow me," he didn't even doubt that he was able to do so. He found the liberating feeling of floating so desirable that by the time the path to his family home came into sight, he was convinced that he wanted to remain a butterfly. "Please let me stay with you and spend the rest of my days fluttering about." But at that moment they landed together on a path, and immediately his legs and arms began to grow back to their normal size. "Dear boy, you should be with the people that love you, but now that you've been in the forest, your heart will have wings, and you'll always be a part of our larger world." This is a tale that is told by indigenous tribes in the northern part of Brazil. Stories are important because they help them maintain their own values in the face of neighboring populations who are exploiting their shared natural resources.